Hi folks, we're Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the issue of racial integration into the Western countries that have been the victims of imposed, forced mass migration from the third world. Now, what people are starting to notice, which is anyone who had eyes could notice this and could notice it for a long time, is that the rate of racial integration of these mass migrant hordes, who all come, by the way, from surplus population areas of the world, and those surplus population of the areas, whether they're India or Pakistan, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, parts of Africa, whatever, they are vastly different cultures, language, customs, habits, tribalism, vastly different from the West. Now, another Western country, or even a middle-income country, like say Poland is not a Western country, but a Polish person going to live in the West would still integrate reasonably quickly. As would somebody say from, I don't know, the Czech Republic. So as long as they're middle or first world, as long as they're white and Christian and these sort of things, their chances of integrating quickly are fairly high. This is them choosing to integrate. Now, migrating because you want to start a new life, or migrating because you want a better life, those are two different things. So the people that were going to, say, the America and Australia and so on during those earlier migrant days, they were going to start a new life. Did they want that new life to be a better life? Sure. But the people coming from the Pakistans and the Indias, they're not starting a new life. They just want a better life. They want to live exactly the same life as they were in India or Afghanistan, just with more money. And that's a very different sort of migrant with very different motivations. The people that want to migrate just for a better life, I want to keep everything the same, I just want more money. They don't want to integrate. They refuse to integrate. There's huge resistance to integrating. They want to bring and impose their culture with them, and they'll claim that you're the fascist Nazi if you don't like that. So I just want to talk about the integration rate of these mass migrants generally is less than 2%. Some even suggest it's less than 1%. But let's just be generous, and we'll go at the upper range here and say it's 2%. That's per generation. A generation is 25 years notionally. That means it would take to integrate the mass migrants already in the West, or given the majority of migrants are from places like India, it would take something in the order of 1,200 years. Yep, you heard that right, 1,200 years to complete the integration. Now it would take, to integrate half of them would take something in the order of 600 years. So that's the time span. Well, assuming it even happens over that time, by the way. So, because given the ones that have integrated, that is the 1%, then they're obviously fully inclined to do that, whereas the ones that haven't integrated are strongly resistant to it. Now, this is integrating, of course, to the host population. Now, if these people were just temporary visitors and they didn't want to integrate, like maybe they're students or on a short-term work visa or something, like, hey, who cares? But they want the Western passport, they want the Western all the welfare handouts. They want everything plus. They want special allocations of jobs in the public service. They want their special representative. They want to create their own country. So they're inside the West. So they're invader colonizers from a cultural perspective, rather than people that have any intention or even the slightest intention of contributing or integrating and so on. So we're talking about a very different category from those who want to start a new life altogether. People going to America, so I want to be an American. The migrants going there. Now, it didn't mean that if you're, say, I don't know, an Italian, in the 1860s and 70s, there was like a civil war in Italy, a unification war. The Giuseppe Garibaldi and all that sort of stuff, and it didn't mean because Italians came to the United States, it didn't mean that they stopped liking, I don't know, pasta or something like that. They still had those things, but they wanted to be American. They want their children to be American. This is very different from, say, the Indian immigrants to the West today that want their children to be Indian. Oh no, we're not Australian. You silly man. What made you think so? So what can be done? Well, it's sort of the options are really starting to narrow down here. There was a starry-eyed vision 25, 30 years ago. Give them a few years, they'll be as Australian as anybody else. No. And the examples of that, well, look at those English people that came in the 1950s and 60s. They integrated sort of straight away. I mean, what's wrong with that? No, it's not the same, you fucking moron. These people come from very, very different tribal cultures, attitudes, language, views, and they're not coming because they want the Western. They're not coming to start a new life. They're coming just to take the money. They're coming to take. They're not coming to give, and they're not coming to share. It's interesting. The Indian propagandists say that if it wasn't for the Indians, Australia would have no healthcare system or anything like that. Indians prop it all up. Indians are so fucking clever and hardworking. If it wasn't for Indians, Australia would just collapse into the ocean. Yeah, right. How did Australia do so well before the Indians arrived? Tell me about that. Now, so we're narrowing down here. Remigration, sending these people back to where they came from. If you're not integrating or don't want to integrate or can't integrate, refuse to integrate, then you should go back. That's okay. We'll give you a plane ticket. We'll pay for you to go back. But if you don't want to become part of this society, then why stay? Oh, we want to stay because we can steal everything we get in our hands. No, that's not a reason to fucking stay. You have to go back if you don't want to integrate. So no ghettos, no tribal ghettos, and these sorts of things. So remigration is one, and I think that definitely should be a policy on the table. If you can't speak the language, and if you can't compete for jobs with you're not getting affirmative action, DEI jobs and that sort of thing, then you should be invited to leave, I would think. Now, maybe you in that time you're an Indian or something. You married a locally born Australian, not of your diaspora. Well, that's different. Then that is an act of integration, as I would see it, at least. But the wider issue is this: that if you don't want to integrate, can't refuse to integrate, then you have to go back. So that go back to the country of origin. The next thing is to prevent, stop, or limit, or outlaw even the behaviours that these mass migrants, third world peasant mass migrants, the behaviours that they cling to that allow them to perpetuate their non-integration. So what are those behaviours? Now, in the case of Indians, even Indians that are 5, 6, 7 generations Western born, they still send back to the village of their ancestors as husbands and brides. It is pivotally important to the Indians to keep their genetic pool and cultural pool fresh and new. They do not want to have genetics outside of the Indian genetic diaspora, and they want to keep culturally pure. Very important to the Indians. Cultural purity is absolutely important. So to do that, they send back again to the village of their ancestors for husbands and brides, and arranged marriages and things like that are a big deal in India. They're almost medieval in that sort of way of doing things. The other thing that the third world people do is they send money back to from their jobs in Australia or the West. They send money back to their family in whichever third world shithole they come from. Now, these are most of these places have an average annual income of about $2,000. That's so the equivalent of sort of 2 weeks' wages in a Western country. Now, their cost of living is much less, of course, in those places, but even so, $100 from Australia or $100 US or something like that coming once a month, that's serious money that in purchasing power terms, that effectively doubles their income. So, and it's huge bragging rights as well. My son or daughter's in the West, and they're hugely successful. They're very powerful, very influential. They tell white people what to do. They're the boss, and huge bragging rights stuff. So, if just a few things, if you stop you have to marry. This is say for Indians, Pakistanis, you have to marry a local. You can't have an arranged marriage. You can't bring out a bride or a husband from overseas. Now that would prevent a lot of them wanting to come to the West, because that's very much part of their overall shtick. But if they were told they couldn't do that, or if they want to go and marry, an Indian, then they have to leave the country for 10 years before they can return, or something like that. Something that really discourages them from. Now, out of all the Indians I know, I don't know a single one, not one, that has actually married a locally born. They'll only marry other Indians. That's a problem in itself, I guess. But they only marry Indian born. None of them are married locally born Indians. So one Indian I came across had married a guy who'd been in Australia for 5 generations, I think it was, and each generation they send back to the village of their ancestors. But he married a local an Indian woman who had come over to Australia when she was like, I don't know, 10 years old or something, with her family, and she very much plays the Indian victim. I've been so oppressed by evil white racism and so on and so forth. And even though she was given an affirmative action scholarship paid for by white taxpayers to go to university and so on, she still claims she's a victim of white oppression and racism. So, but anyway, he married her. That's the closest I think I've ever seen in any Indian situation, where even Indians that are born in Australia will still send back to the village of their ancestors for the arranged husband or bride. So this keeps them as a separate race and keeps them as a separate culture, which they want. And then they live. You mostly tend to live in areas that are predominantly Indian. Sometimes you might find that the upper end of the professional class may disperse a little bit, but that's not much. And even them, they still send back to the village again of their ancestors for husbands and brides, and very determined to keep the cultural gene pool fresh. They also view Australian culture or Western culture as being quite inferior. So again, their resistance to integration is fairly acute and intense. Now, if you stop the money being sent back overseas, or tax it heavily so they won't do it, then you create a situation where you break the link with their country of origin. That it reduces that sort of close personal connection that they have. And I would argue with people like Indians and those third world people, particularly those who allege that they're refugees and the like, or they're trying to escape some sort of oppression, that they can't go back to the country of origin. Assuming that they've got citizenship, they can't go back to the country of their origin for 10 years to visit, and various controls should be put in place. They have to give up you have to renounce or give up their passport of their country of origin, and they become, if they come to Australia or America, whatever, they have to say, well, I want to be an Australian. So with people with a very low inclination to integrate, assuming you want to keep them in the West, which even that I'd question, then there need to be extra measures to encourage them to integrate. And without those additional measures, I would argue they will never integrate, or it will take 1,200 years to do it, and it'll be a slow process where all these people all these groups are demanding special handouts, special rights, special protections, special carve-outs in everything, and this is not good for the rest of us, or for any other group outside of their own diaspora. So I would argue that measures need to be taken to encourage integration, and there can be other things that, okay, you've got 5 years to learn English to high school level. Free classes, won't cost you anything, but you have to do it. And if you don't turn up to these classes, if you can't be bothered to learn English or turn up, then you can't claim any government benefits of any description. And if at 5 years you still can't speak English, then we're going to have to ask you to leave. And you need to sign that as a condition and contract on arrival. Now there'll be screams and cries, it's Hitler, Nazis, Swastika measures, But the reality is, without measures such as this, this integration will never take place. And again, the integration rate of white Christian people, now, whatever the reason, white Christian, you Nazi, white, and the integration rate is very high. Even people that say, rural Greek peasants that came to Australia in that 1950s communist uprising thing in Greece, quite a few. A lot of them were rural peasants because they thought their farms were going to be appropriate. In fact, they were in some cases. So these people arrive instead. They're illiterate peasants. They're illiterate in Greek, let alone English. And they arrive, and their grandchildren. So a lot of these people came when they were quite young. The older people tended to stay in Greece, but the younger people came. So they'd have been in their 20s, early 20s, late teens, a lot of cases, when they came to Australia as, kind of migrant refugees, if you like. And so their children were born here in Australia, and their grandchildren are born. In fact, those grandchildren now are having children themselves. And you ask them, I'm Greek, and they only marry other Greeks, and so even the integration rate there is quite low. That they do integrate much better than Indians and so on do, but their integration rate there is fairly low. I would speculate it's maybe 30%, if that, and that's for the grandchildren. And they read Greek newspapers. They get all sort of hot under the collar about local Greek political issues, as if anyone gives a fuck, and this sort of stuff. And they're much less concerned or interested in Australian issues. Yet this is where they were born and where they live, where their parents were born, and the parents live here. So they integrate quite slowly. And again, they often are sending back to the village of their ancestors for husbands and brides, and again will only marry other Greek people. Now they will integrate, much faster than the Indians or Bangladeshis, whatever will. But still, it indicates that the why is it that white Christians now that integrate quickly or comparatively quickly, no matter where they come from, how different the language. There's the Swedish people who come here. They don't think, I'm only going to marry a Swedish girl from the village that I grew up. They don't think that. Or that the English people say, I'm only going to marry someone who comes from, this or that village, Higher Wycombe or something. And there's no Heath Hawley or something. There's no thoughts of that at all. They marry somebody locally, and they're already Australian at that point. In fact, white Christians who come to, I suppose the Christian thing isn't per se necessary, but nearly all of them tend to be. If they come under the age of, say pre-high school or from say high school onwards, the beginning of high school onwards, that they'll integrate within their lifetime. You ask, say, an English migrant who came to Australia at 10 years old, and when they're 30 years old, you ask them what nationality. I'm an Australian. But that's a white Christian, and it's that level of integration that we've taken for granted for a long time in the West, but it's just not happening anymore. But the measures and processes and procedures that need to be put in place to encourage or force these people to integrate, from these third world peasant shitholes, they haven't been put into place. And the assumption is that these folks will just integrate like no, they're not, and they won't. And they certainly have no intention of integrating at all. And so that needs to be addressed as an issue. Or, as I say, look, if you don't want to integrate, that's fine. That's your choice. But we'd like you to go back to where you come from. Now they're going to scream, "Oh no, I want all your freebies, I want all your handouts." Well, too fucking bad. If you want all those handouts, then you must become an integrated citizen in this civis, and they've got no intention of doing that. And so measures need to be put in place to encourage them to integrate or to go back. You've been with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.